You were probably just as shocked as I was when Emu decided to wipe the Lelucia kingdom clean off the One Piece map. But what if I told you there was a lot more to Emu's powers than meets the eye? I mean, every sign points to Emu launching this attack from the safety of Pangaea Castle. So what powers could they possibly possess? Is Emu using Uranus, or maybe something else altogether? And I think we just saw several hints, about 16 of them, that might prove exactly how Emu can wipe islands off the map in just the blink of an eye. Could these 16 beams also be tied to the 16 rays of light that have been a symbol of the sun for centuries? And then could this even tie into an actual sun god-like power? I mean, if you're a fan of my false god Nika theory, then you're definitely going to enjoy this one, because this theory on Emu just couldn't possibly fit in any better. But please take a second to drop a like down below, because it really goes a long way to help push my content out further into the algorithm, which the channel sorely needs, so I just really appreciate it. But on to the theory.
Yeah.
Emu may seem like nothing more than a stick with a tall crown and red eyes that can just shoot death beams right now, but even within the handful of pages that we've gotten, there's a lot that we can build on to start speculating on what Emu's powers are all about. So let's cover some of what we do know about Emu. First off, they're the head of the entire world government, but until this chapter, only the Gorosei seem to be aware of their existence. Emu also has red-ringed eyes, which we have seen a number of times in the story, including Gear 5 and Sulong form, which are extremely important. They also have a giant frozen straw hat for God knows what reason, and they seemingly operate out of this small garden most of the time. And of course, Emu can launch nukes that erase islands from existence, apparently. These factors seem to point to Emu being very old, potentially as old as the Void Century, and I wouldn't even be surprised if Emu was the one who created the world government itself. The giant straw hat also just reeks of Joy Boy connections, so what kind of power would really enable Emu to accomplish all of this? I mean, they can drop nukes from a distance for crying out loud, and that just sounds like something that a literal god could do. But as I explained in my false god Nika video, which I'll go ahead and leave down below, gods don't actually exist in One Piece, meaning that Luffy's fruit is still just the same rubber fruit that we've come to know and love. And I don't want to make this a whole false god Nika video, but just know that Luffy's powers have nothing close to the powers of a sun god, even when he's in Gear 5th. And no, I don't think an occasional fire-covered fist counts. Luffy is just rubbery, and even when he's awakened, he is able to stretch things more than before. And the only people in One Piece who seriously believe themselves to be God have all been terrible people. I mean, Eneru is a great example, and we're going to get into him more in a minute, but the celestial dragons themselves are also a perfect example. But the big difference with Emu is that they seemingly do have the powers of a god. I mean, not a god, but it's strong enough to certainly seem that way, right? It has a startling resemblance to some of Eneru's attacks as well, most notably the Raigo, El Thor, and also Sango. So I want to really hone in on this parallel between Eneru and Emu, because this latest attack is way too similar to Raigo for me to ignore. Eneru charged up this attack at the end of the arc, hoping to completely destroy the island of Skypiea, which obviously ties right into Emu destroying Lelucia Kingdom, right? And we also have to consider that Eneru considered himself a god, which is probably not all that far off from Emu's current status atop the entire world government. And we know that Eneru wanted to go to Fairy Verth, aka the moon, where he eventually became the leader of an entire population of automata. And Emu is the head of the celestial dragons, thus tying his leadership to outside the earth as well. So obviously these two have a lot in common, and thus a lot of parallels. But the inversion is obviously that Emu's attack actually landed, and it was fast. Eneru had to charge up so long that it was actually dispelled by Luffy before he was able to use it, while Emu dropped their attack in almost an instant. Sabo couldn't even finish the call before it landed. And it was from a far distance. I think that's much more godlike, even if Eneru's was very impressive in its own right. But there's also one other difference to their attacks that you have to know about. If you look at Emu's attack, the lines are straight beams, not your typical jagged lightning bolts. And if you want to go ahead and say that it's just how Oda decided to draw it, then please just go look at almost every single lightning attack or use of hockey lightning that we've ever seen in the story. It's always very jagged. as you would expect. And Oda does not hide away from drawing it that way. And Oda has also drawn other beams in a similar way to Emu's attack before, with Kizaru's attacks and the Pacifistas. And we know that those beams are made of light thanks to Kizaru's fruit, but if Kizaru's the one with the light fruit, then how the hell can Emu use light, especially to this freaking caliber? Well, one common criticism that I want to dispel first and foremost is about the clouds. Many people have pointed out to me that those signify a thunderstorm, so it's probably lightning, and there was also something dark above the clouds that they spotted as well. But as far as the clouds go, I mean, we've seen clouds come in and get parted all the damn time in One Piece. Clouds are created and moved by any number of things like pressure, temperature, and condensation, and while we've seen lightning from them a million times, like with Nami and Zeus especially, we've also seen plenty of times where the clouds appear without lightning. For instance, look at Shanks meeting Whitebeard. As soon as their situation starts to go sour, dark clouds move in, and then they clash and split them. Oda uses them for dramatic effect all the time, so I really wouldn't put a lot of weight into the clouds. And as for the dark thing above the clouds, I think that could just be as simple as a Raigo, but with light power. And yes, it's light, so you might expect it to look light, but Eneru's was made of lightning, and it was still black. I mean, Emu would be kind of absorbing the sunlight into an attack, kind of like Kuma with his Ursa Shock, so it would make sense to appear black. But then once the attack is unleashed, it would get very bright, just as we saw in chapter 1060. Or an even cooler idea is that it's Emu's other eye, and that's what it shoots beams out of. I mean, there has been quite a focus on the eye. And maybe this is just some type of confirmation bias, but let's take a closer look at what's above the clouds. Doesn't that look like an oblong shape, almost like a closed eye? And then of course, my idea is once Emu opened it, the sun attack was unleashed and the island got destroyed. Let me know what you think about that idea in the comments. But one last thing that I want to dispel is that Emu just used Uranus, or is Uranus himself. The first problem with that is that Emu has likely been using this power for 800 years since they took over the world government. And Poseidon wasn't even alive until 16 years ago, and Pluton hasn't been found in those 800 years. So it would just be very strange to me for it to be the case that Uranus has been getting used this entire time. Plus we know from Shiki that Roger found an apocalyptic weapon, and it's very unlikely that that would be Poseidon or Pluton, given the information that we know now. So that's another question that we would need answered. So it would just be very strange for Uranus to be in Emu's hands all this time. But still, what would even give Emu the power to manipulate light to this insane degree if that is what's happening? Well, let's consider where light originates from in the first place. The sun. And this factor is really what sent my head spinning, and was really just the main inspiration for this video. If those really are beams, much like the ones that we've seen from Kizaru, is it possible that Emu just uses light from the sun itself? They look astonishingly similar to me. There's a bright light, followed by a series of cylindrical beams, including an explosion if it lands. And let's focus more on the bright light that we saw directly before Emu's attack even landed. And just look how bright it is. The people on Lulusia probably think it looks just like the sun, and they're even shielding their eyes from it just like you would if you were trying to block your eyes from the sun yourself. So all of these factors really just make me think that Emu's attack is much closer to being light-based than lightning-based, if that makes sense. And we know that the world government feeds their marines devil fruits, likely meaning that they recycle them in some way, or at least they try to. So I really wouldn't be shocked if the world government has been keeping Kizaru's light fruit in rotation over the years as well. I mean, this could be partially due to its strength alone, but what's really interesting about Kizaru's fruit is that we have not seen a superior or inferior version yet. This makes him the only one of the original 3 admirals that Oda has kept secret from us. I mean, Akainu's magma fruit is very famously a superior version of Ace's flame fruit, and Aokiji's ice fruit is a superior version of Monet's snow fruit. And these two were literally confirmed by Oda in an SBS. But Kizaru was the only original admiral that wasn't on this list, meaning that Kizaru's fruit has no superior or inferior one yet. Isn't that a little strange? I mean, Kizaru is kind of the odd man out of the 3, right? The other 2 were the ones selected to a high diff battle for Fleet Admiral, and Kizaru just kind of sat in his old same admiral position this whole time, and he hasn't made any significant moves in his life like the other 2. And he's also known to be very lazy, right? So maybe that's holding him back in some way. You could almost say that Kizaru is a little inferior, perhaps, compared to his counterparts. So maybe Kizaru's fruit is the inferior version of another fruit, as opposed to being the superior version like Aokiji and Akainu. And again, Oda loves his parallels and inversions, and it's strange that only 2 of 3 admirals were listed by him specifically. So basically what I'm really getting at is that Emu's power may just be an improved version of Kizaru's fruit. Kizaru is light itself, and he can produce it, but imagine if somebody could control the light around them to create a similar laser beam type attack, and maybe even become one with sunlight itself. And this could allow any number of things, such as instant travel basically anywhere that light is touching, which might just be anywhere in the universe, and maybe Emu can even use the light as a medium to hear and see anything they want in the entire world, since light is practically everywhere, just like Eneru did with his lightning power and observation haki while in Skypiea. To build on this even more, Emu seemed to launch the attack while in the garden, which has access to sunlight, and Emu probably can't go out in public very often, so this might just be the base of operations per se when using the sun fruit's abilities, since Emu is actually touching the sunlight in this room, but it's also safe since nobody can see them. And obviously the sun has always just been a big focus in the world of One Piece as well as our own. I mean, 99.99% of life in our solar system has relied heavily on the sun, and that's why sun gods have been so prevalent throughout any number of cultures in our world's history. And it's really hard to blame them. Proper sunlight was essential to a good harvest. The sun is also just immensely powerful because it emits practically endless energy. I mean, it's not actually endless, but let's not really get into that, you know what I mean. Really, any single star in the universe could act as a sun. And if someone could harness that energy in some way, that power would just be devastating. Almost strong enough to be fairly considered the sun god. And let's take one last look at when that attack lands, because obviously we have that bright light in the sky resembling a sun, but then we get exactly 16 different beams raining down from the sky. And I've seen people toss this image around as a way to tie in Emu's attack to Uranus and the other ancient weapons, and while I definitely don't think that's accurate, this hieroglyph does show a half sun with 8 rays on it, meaning it would be 16 as a full sun, yet again tying the sun and Emu together with the number 16. And maybe more importantly, it was found in outer space, yet again tying to the word celestial. But what is the significance of the number 16? Well, the rising sun flag of Japan has exactly 16 rays of sunshine coming from the sun itself. And this could very well be tied to Doflamingo's 16 holy bullets attack, since he knows a lot about the secrets in Marie Joie. Plus, the rising sun flag has been around for centuries, which could also tie to the fact that Emu has likely been around a long time as well. And we've actually seen the rising sun symbol used in the story already, and that was on the helmet of the dirt boss in Gadatsu's cover story. The symbol was even hidden behind a symbol of Mount Fuji, which ties it to Wano and all of its traditional Japanese symbolism. And there's also a Mount Fuji-sized mountain of evidence that proves that that very same mole has close ties to Pluton, and you'll just have to check out my other mole videos to find out why. And given the sun's significance in One Piece, I think the fact that it's exactly 16 beams, or maybe 16 rays of light, is very significant. And as I mentioned earlier, Emu is the head of the celestial dragons, which implies a space connection right away. And sunlight exists throughout the entire universe, so if Emu can transport themselves through light, then what's stopping them from going anywhere in the entire universe as well? I mean, we do know that there are space pirates already, and of course, of all people who would meet them, they met Eneru, who already has a ton of connections to Emu. So at this point, I would honestly just be surprised if Emu had nothing to do with space, and a light fruit would be the perfect way to travel anywhere without issue. So I took a longer look at the space pirates that we got to meet, and what I found honestly scares me quite a bit. Some of the space pirates that we got to meet had an unusual shape. Their shoulders went above their head, kind of Hunchback of Notre Dame style. So their head is kind of in their chest instead of on top of their shoulders like most people, except for their captain, who is in a tall black cloak with a tall hat. Maybe I'm stretching it, but isn't there a loose resemblance to Emu here? Anyway, I want to focus on the hunchbacks, because isn't this how Emu is shaped? And look how low Emu's hands are in this image, and compare it to the other hunchbacks from the moon. Even though their shoulders are above their head, their arms are super long, resulting in their hands being about as low as Emu's. This is is yet another sign that Emu could be from outer space, right? But what's interesting about that thought is that all of the space pirates are wearing pressurized suits. Since they all have them, I think they need them to survive in outer space, which reminds me of the coating that you need to visit Fishman Island in a way, which would also imply that maybe these people aren't actually from outer space. Are they from Earth or maybe a different planet, and they just use these suits to travel and maybe they tried to colonize the moon? Well, I'm glad I asked that question, because after Eneru beat the space pirates, he discovered those hieroglyphs that I showed earlier. These glyphs told a story about how 3 races left the moon in pursuit of resources from Earth, which were the Burkans, Skypeans, and Shandorians. And the 4th race, the Automata, which are robots that are powered by electricity, were left behind and eventually found dormant by Eneru. This might hint that the resources on Earth are very important, and also why Emu decided to take over if they were indeed from outer space. And it's interesting that the Automata were dormant until Enel zapped them to life, as if they required electricity to live in their past life, but ran out at some point. Kind of like how the other 3 races ran out of their resources and had to leave the moon. So maybe a past lightning fruit user was the leader of all 4 of these races, and he used his fruit to help them travel the universe. This would make sense because the Automata needed a lot of power to stay on, and the Arc Maxim is already an example of an electric-powered spaceship. This would also add to the growing evidence of devil fruit wills existing for all types of fruits, which I have talked about in great length before, so you should definitely check this video out if you haven't already, because if what I described earlier is accurate, then that means that the lightning fruit made it back to Earth somehow, was eventually eaten by Eneru, who is a Birkin, and he used it to get back to the moon and save the Automata. It's also ironic because he wanted to kill the Skypeans and Shandorians, which seem to be his ancestors' allies. And if we keep the whole theme going of Emu is a more successful version of Eneru, then maybe Emu's sun abilities allowed them to travel the universe much faster and efficiently so that they didn't have the same resource issues as those on the moon. They may have taken over the entire universe and just decided to take whatever resources they wanted because they were so powerful. But maybe Earth's resources were very special, primarily because of the water and the temperate climate. So maybe Emu claimed that one as their final prize, thus making Emu kind of the space pirate king. Let me know what you think about that idea in the comments. But there is one potential downfall to having a sunlight fruit. What if you didn't have access to any sunlight whatsoever? Which may already remind you of a certain somebody, Blackbeard. Blackbeard has wanted his fruit since day one, and obviously this man knows a lot more than he leads on. I mean, he is darkness itself, and darkness is gravity according to him, and light is affected by gravity. Light cannot escape a black hole, which is why they are black to begin with, and this is even one of Blackbeard's attacks. So what happens if Blackbeard can get a hold of Emu with his darkness power? Would Emu's powers just not work anymore? And this also ties back to Blackbeard's connection with rocks, right? Because God Valley was supposedly wiped clean off the map as well, just like Lelucia was. And we know that Blackbeard has connections to rocks thanks to his ship being called the Saber of Zebek, as well as him making Hachinosu his home base of operations, since Rocks also used to call that his home. Perhaps Rocks knew that the fruit was necessary to beat Emu in the first place, and somehow that knowledge or will lives on within Blackbeard. I mean, we do know that Blackbeard wants to become Pirate King and take over the world after all. And I want to drive home one last point about Emu's connections to Luffy, Joy Boy, and sun god Nika, and that's again that gods don't exist, and if they do, it's a bad guy calling himself one because he got lucky with a souped up power. But ironically enough, anyone that has the ability to control the sun's light would actually be close to god level. This is because the sun's rays are absolutely vital for life to exist in the first place. Without sunlight, life would just cease to exist on Earth. So what's a godlier power than controlling the sun's rays? Plus, we have the fun, interesting twist of the biggest villain in the story controlling the rays from the sun, which is just held in such a high regard in One Piece. It's as if the dawn will only come when the sun god is taken out. The sun cannot truly rise again until the individual controlling it is beaten. And Nika is only the sun god due in part to the fact they're the ones meant to topple the real sun god in the end. So the ultimate question is, what fruit do I think Emu has exactly? I mean, what can be an improved version of Kizaru's fruit that also holds the mantle of being a true sun god? Well, what about one of the most absolute famous sun gods in history, Sun God Ra? No, not the winged dragon of Ra. Well, I mean, sort of. I mean, look at this mode it goes into. It looks like a sun, right? Sun god Ra is one of the most famous deities ever, probably, and is one of the strongest in all of Egyptian mythology. Ra embodied the power of the sun, but was also thought to just be the sun itself. Ra is also the one who gave order to the other gods, and supposedly even created their world. Ra was enabled this power through the power of Heka, which Ra also created, and Heka is basically just magic. That could easily be a connection to devil fruits, and this could potentially hint to Emu being the one who created devil fruits so that they were able to rule the universe using the strongest one. Whether Emu created devil fruits is a story for another day, but I think this type of juxtaposition between Luffy using a fake sun god fruit that's just a boring rubber fruit in reality to defeat someone with true sun god powers would just be very fitting in the world that Oda has created. And let's get back to Emu's eye as we talked about earlier. I think this could easily be a tie to the Eye of Ra. The Eye of Ra is a feminine counterpart to Ra itself, and is a very violent force. She's an extension of Ra's power and is equated with the disk of the sun. The Eye of Ra is a source of heat and light, and is usually associated with fire. But what's really interesting to me is the fact that it's associated with the red light that you see before a sunrise. That is exactly the same idea as the red rising sun flag that also has 16 rays. I am currently leaning towards the Eye of Ra, which may just look like Emu's eye, or the disk of the sun being the dark object above the clouds in chapter 1060. And from that, Emu was able to send down the 16 beams of light that destroyed Lucia. Also, when this supposed eye goddess rampages out of control, it's very difficult to stop her, and that's really just a prominent motif in a lot of Egyptian mythology. Oda has drawn on so many different real-world folklores throughout the story, with of course Japanese folklore such as in Wano, but also Norse mythology with the giants, Greek mythos with Big Mom's homies, and of course we have plenty of Egyptian ties within the Alabasta arc. But what's interesting about Alabasta is that they are the one kingdom of the original 20 that refused to stay in Marijua. I mean, why is that? Could there be a tie between the fact that the most Egypt-like kingdom was also the one to refuse to file directly under the sun god? As if they knew Emu was not the real sun god, in the sense that they were not benevolent at least, and so they just refused to completely bow to them. And if you think this is too crazy, think a little more about what literally just happened at the Reverie. Thanks to chapter 1060, it appears that Emu is the one who killed Cobra thanks to the context of what Saba was saying. And this comes off the heels of Cobra wanting a private conversation with the Gorosei. I mean, what could he have been asking? And how did Emu even end up there at the same time? Plus, Emu seemed to pick Vivi as the light to be extinguished. Isn't that odd that they always use that term light? Robin is also referred to as the light or the flame of the revolution by the entire revolutionary army. Could this be because Emu wants to be the only light and they extinguish any other bright ones that may reveal Emu's identity eventually? And you have to admit that it's weird that there's all these connections back to Alabasta. Why are they seemingly the target of Emu? And why did this family have issues staying in Marijua in the first place? And given that Alabasta has Egyptian ties, both aesthetically and even within their family name Nefertari, this makes me lean towards some type of mythical sun god Ra power for Emu's fruit, if they do indeed control sunlight as I predict. But given the number of sun deities in the world and the fact that Oda just made one up for Luffy that we've never heard of, the name of Emu's fruit could be anything at this point. But what's really important are those sunlight controlling abilities representing the sun that we've heard throughout the story. And one thing I considered was if Emu can kind of merge with sunlight itself, they will be almost impossible to hit in battle, right? Especially if they have top tier hockey and such as well. But if Luffy wants to slow down someone who's too fast, I can think of one person who can help with that.
I think that we should consider having them arrested.
No, seriously, hear me out. Foxy's powers used a not yet discovered particle that creates a light that slows anything's velocity down. And the key here is not yet discovered. Imagine if rubber had never even been discovered or used widely in the first place. Anyone with lightning powers would have never lost. There would almost be no defense for it. And the same idea could unironically exist for Emu, yet again creating another parallel inversion with Eneru. Emu's powers can only be negated by something nobody has discovered yet. And no, I don't think Foxy is going to come back and participate in this fight, but maybe Vegapunk has been working on this particle, and some way or another, Emu apparently gets hit by a slow beam, and maybe it's because the lab gets destroyed during their fight or something and Luffy just gets really lucky. And then Luffy recognizes that it's exactly like what happened against Foxy, so he gets a hit in, which really starts to clue Luffy in on how he's going to be able to beat Emu. And then maybe we have some Conqueror shenanigans go on and, Luffy kind of powers up and stuff, but we're not going to get into that in this video. And I really just wanted to highlight this comment from Foxy because I do think it's going to matter at some point. Just like a lot of the other things that happened in Long Ring Long Land that I am almost sure you missed the first time reading it, even including what, where, and why is the One Piece itself. And that's actually the topic of a mega theory that I've been working on for some time now. So please make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on that one in the future, because I promise you will not want to miss that one. But that's all I had for today, guys, so maybe consider checking out one of these two videos that you should probably already see on the screen. Later.